You finished the conversation 3 hours ago and you're still in it. You're lying in bed, or maybe standing in the kitchen pretending to make tea, but your mind is somewhere else entirely. It's back in that moment, that one sentence you said. The way their face shifted, just barely, just for a second. The pause before they responded. You've replayed it 11 times now, maybe 12. And each time, you find a new angle to worry about, a new way it could have landed wrong. A new reason to believe you said too much, or not enough, or the wrong thing entirely. And the worst part is, you can't even explain why. The conversation wasn't a fight. Nobody cried. Nothing dramatic happened. By any outside measure, it was just a normal exchange between two people. But you don't live on the outside. You live so far inside, in the underneath of things, in the space between what was said and what was meant, that normal conversations feel like archaeology. You're always digging, always trying to find what's really there. This is what it's like to be you. And I want you to know, before we go any further, that I see it, all of it, the exhaustion of it, the loneliness of being someone who feels everything when the rest of the world seems to feel so little. The strange isolation of being the person in the room who notices every micro-expression, every change in tone, every silence that lasts just a beat too long. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not too sensitive, and you have heard that phrase enough for one lifetime. What you are is an empath. And being an empath in a world that was not built for people like you is one of the most quietly difficult things a person can be. Today we're going to talk about why you overthink every conversation. Not just what it looks like from the outside, because you already know what it looks like. We're going to go into why, into the roots of it, the psychological architecture underneath it, the reason your nervous system is wired the way it is, and what that wiring has been trying to protect you from all along. And then, because I care about you too much to just leave you feeling understood, without also leaving you feeling empowered, we're going to talk about what it's costing you, and what you can start to choose instead. Let's begin where it actually begins, which is not in adulthood, and not in that conversation last Tuesday. It begins much earlier. It begins in the moments, probably in childhood, when you first learned that the emotional temperature of a room was your responsibility. Maybe you grew up in a home where someone's mood could change everything, where you learned to read your parents' face the moment they walked through the door, before they even spoke, because that split second of information would tell you what kind of evening it was going to be. Maybe it was subtler than that. Maybe nobody was angry or unpredictable. Maybe it was just that you were the sensitive one, the child who cried at things others shrugged off, and you received the message, even if it was never said aloud, that your feelings were somehow excessive. Too big, too much. So you started managing. You started paying very close attention to other people, their moods, their needs, their unspoken expectations, not because someone told you to, but because it felt like survival. Because somewhere in your young mind, you made an equation. If I understand what they're feeling, I can respond in the right way. If I respond in the right way, things stay okay. If things stay okay, I am safe. Do you understand what happened there? You learned to use empathy as a form of protection, not just as a gift, not just as a beautiful capacity to connect with others, but as a shield, as an early warning system, as a way to stay one step ahead of emotional danger. And the strategy worked. You became extraordinary at reading people. You could walk into a room and feel its energy before you spoke a single word. You could sense a friend's sadness even when she was smiling. You could feel the tension between two people who were pretending everything was fine. You became fluent in the language underneath language, the emotional subtext, the things nobody was saying. But here's what nobody told you. Strategies we develop in childhood don't stay in childhood. They travel with us. They become the default setting, the way we move through every relationship, every interaction, every conversation for the rest of our lives, unless we consciously interrupt them. And that's what's happening when you lie awake at midnight replaying a conversation from the afternoon. You're not being neurotic. You're running a survival program that is decades old. Your nervous system learned that closely monitoring others' emotional states keeps you safe. So it does. Constantly. Automatically. Without your permission. The scientific name for what you're experiencing is called hypervigilance. In clinical settings, it's often associated with trauma and anxiety, but it exists on a spectrum, and for empaths, it's incredibly common. It's not just worry. It's a state of heightened alertness, an ongoing surveillance of the social environment, a constant scanning for signals that something might be wrong. Your brain is not overthinking because it's malfunctioning. It's overthinking because it believes, on a very deep level, that overthinking is what keeps you loved and connected and safe. And I want to sit with that for a moment because it's important. Your overthinking isn't a flaw. It was once a form of intelligence. It was your nervous system being brilliantly adaptive. The problem is not that you developed it. The problem is that it hasn't updated. It's still running the old code in a new world. In friendships where people aren't actually fragile. In relationships where a misunderstanding doesn't mean abandonment. In conversations that were genuinely fine and need no more analysis. Now let's talk about what this looks like in practice, because I suspect you'll recognize yourself in every sentence. You say something in a group setting, a joke maybe, or an opinion, and it lands without much reaction. Most people move on immediately, but you don't move on, you stay there. You start wondering if it was offensive, if it made someone uncomfortable, if the person who got quiet did so because of what you said. You run through the alternatives, what you could have said instead, how you might have phrased it differently. By the time you're home, you've constructed an entire narrative in which you cause some kind of invisible harm, and you're already composing a mental apology for a wound you're not even sure you inflicted. Or there's this one. Someone gives you a short reply, 2 words, maybe 3, where they usually write more. And suddenly you're fluent in a language of omission. You read the brevity as coldness, as withdrawal, as a sign that something is wrong between you. You don't text them again right away, because you don't want to seem needy, but the not texting itself becomes its own source of anxiety, because what if the silence makes things worse, and around you go. Or you're in a one-on-one conversation, and you're talking, really talking, sharing something real, and for a second their eyes drift sideways, just for a second. They look back immediately. They keep listening. But you caught it. And now part of you is no longer present in the conversation, because part of you is trying to solve what that eye drift meant. Were they bored? Distracted? Did you say something wrong? Is this too much? Are you too much? And there it is, that question, the one underneath all the other questions. Am I too much? That is the core wound. That is what all this vigilance is really serving. Not just the question of whether the other person is okay, but the deeper, more frightened question of whether you are acceptable. Whether you, in all your depth and sensitivity and intensity, are someone who can be fully known and still loved. Because empaths don't just overthink to protect others. They overthink to protect themselves. Every post-conversation replay is, at its heart, a security scan, a search for evidence. Did I do okay? Are they still with me? Did I say something that will make them leave? And this is where it gets complicated, and where I need to say something that might sting a little, because I promised you truth as well as warmth. The overthinking doesn't actually give you what you're looking for. It feels like it should. It feels like if you analyze the conversation enough, you'll find the answer. You'll know for certain whether they're upset with you. You'll know whether you said the right thing. You'll find peace at the end of all that thinking. But you never do you? Because certainty about how another person feels is not something that lives in your own mind. No amount of replaying will give it to you. What the overthinking actually does is keep you in a suspended state of anxiety, turning the same stones over and over, not because you keep finding new information, but because your nervous system won't let you rest until it feels safe, and it never quite feels safe. There's a concept in psychology called the illusion of control, which is the belief that if we just think hard enough or plan carefully enough, we can control outcomes that are actually outside our influence. For empaths, the overthinking is a form of this. If I analyze what I said precisely enough, I can retroactively fix it. If I understand exactly how they felt, I can manage the outcome. But human relationships don't work that way. People are allowed to have feelings you didn't cause. They're allowed to have a short day that has nothing to do with you. They're allowed to drift in thought during a conversation without it meaning anything about your worth. You cannot think your way into safety inside a relationship. You can only feel your way there. And feeling your way there requires presence, not analysis. Here's something else I want you to hear, something that people don't say often enough to people like you. Your empathy is a profound gift. It really is. The world is measurably better because people like you are in it. The friend who notices, the partner who remembers, the colleague who checks in, the stranger who holds the door, not out of habit, but out of genuine awareness that the person behind them is struggling with something. That is you. That is what you bring. But gifts can be misused, even by the person who carries them. When your empathy is operating from a place of genuine love and abundance, it feels expansive. It feels like joy, like connection, like the particular warmth of being deeply known by someone and deeply knowing them in return. But when your empathy is operating from a place of fear, from that old program of watching and managing and scanning for danger, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like labor. It feels like you're responsible for everyone's emotional state at all times. It feels like the moment you stop monitoring, something will go wrong, and it will somehow be your fault. That version of empathy is exhausting. Not because empathy itself is exhausting, but because fear is exhausting. And most empaths who are burning out, who are lying awake replaying conversations, who are walking on eggshells even in safe relationships, are not burning out from too much love. They're burning out from too much fear, wearing the costume of love. I want you to ask yourself honestly, when you replay that conversation, when you're analyzing every word and every pause and every shift in tone, what are you actually afraid will happen? Not what you're thinking about, what you're afraid of. Is it that they'll be upset with you? Is it that they'll pull away? Is it that you'll be seen as inconsiderate or self-centered or too much? Is it that this person, this friendship, this relationship will crack and fall away because of something you said? Because if the answer is yes to any of those, then what's driving the overthinking isn't concern for the other person, it's fear of losing them. And that's worth sitting with. Because there is a very significant difference between I'm thinking about this because I care about their feelings and I'm thinking about this because I'm terrified of being abandoned or rejected or seen as bad. The first is love. The second is fear. And they can look identical from the outside, but they feel very different from the inside. And they lead you to very different places. Fear-based empathy makes you small. It makes you edit yourself before you speak. It makes you apologize for things that don't require apology. It makes you shrink your needs to make room for everyone else's. And then, in the quiet of your own company, wonder why nobody seems to see how much you're carrying. Why nobody asks how you are the way you ask them. Why you are so full of care for everyone and yet somehow feel so depleted and unseen yourself. And I need to say this with so much love and also with complete directness. Nobody is going to fill that well for you if you keep giving from it without ever letting anyone in to refill it. The people in your life who receive your empathy, most of them are not withholding care from you deliberately. They simply don't know how much you're giving because you've become so skilled at making it look effortless. You've become so practiced at managing the emotional temperature of every room you're in that people around you have stopped noticing that you're doing it. They've come to rely on your steadiness, your warmth, your attention, the way you rely on air. Present, essential, invisible. You made yourself invisible. I know that's hard to read. I know you don't feel invisible. You feel hypervisible in the worst way, always worried about being too much. But emotionally, in terms of your own needs and your own inner world, you have made yourself invisible in most of your relationships. Because to be visible would require letting people see that you also struggle, that you also need, that you also get it wrong sometimes and need to be held through it. And that level of vulnerability feels terrifying for someone whose empathy was born from the need to stay safe. Being vulnerable means not knowing how someone will respond. It means letting the conversation go in a direction you can't control. It means trusting that another person can hold your feelings the way you hold theirs. And that trust requires something that overthinking can never give you. It requires risk. Actual sitting with the uncertainty can't be analyzed away risk. This is the hard truth. Are you ready for it? The overthinking is not protecting your relationships. It is preventing them from going deeper. Every time you edit what you were going to say because you analyzed it first and deemed it potentially too much, you are depriving yourself and the other person of genuine contact. Every time you manage and adjust and soften and navigate, instead of just speaking honestly, you are maintaining a performance of connection rather than building the real thing. And you have become so good at this performance that sometimes even you can't tell the difference anymore. Real connection is not comfortable. Real connection requires the willingness to be misunderstood and work through it. It requires saying the thing that scares you and seeing what happens. It requires trusting, not that you'll always say the perfect thing, but that the relationship is strong enough to survive imperfection. And here's what I want you to notice. The relationships that feel most real to you, the people in your life where you feel most like yourself, those are almost certainly the people with whom you've been imperfect. The friendships that have been through something, the people who have seen you cry or fail or say the wrong thing, because that's when connection becomes real. Not in the polished, managed, perfectly calibrated version of you, but in the raw one. So here is where I want to leave you. Not with a checklist, not with 5 steps to stop overthinking, because you've read those lists before, and they haven't touched the root of this. I want to leave you with a single question, and I want you to carry it with you. What would you do differently in your conversations if you trusted, really trusted, that the people who love you are not going to leave over one imperfect sentence? Sit with that, because the answer to that question is your life as it could be. The things you would say, the needs you would voice, the moments you would stay in instead of retreating into your own analysis, the times you would ask for reassurance instead of staying up until 2 in the morning trying to manufacture it alone, the conversations you would let be imperfect and move on from because you trusted the ground beneath them. You are not too much. You are not the burden you have always been afraid you are. The depth of what you feel is not a problem to be managed. It is a world. And you deserve people who want to live in that world with you, not people you perform stability for while quietly drowning underneath it. Start there. Start with one conversation where you say the true thing instead of the safe thing. Start with one moment where you stay present instead of retreating into the analysis. Start with the radical, terrifying, completely possible act of trusting that you are enough, exactly as you are, and all your overthinking, overfeeling, enormously loving, quietly exhausted, genuinely extraordinary self. The conversation you keep replaying is over. This one, the one happening inside you right now, this is the one worth staying in.